Well, here we are. Okay, greetings, everyone. Everything seems to be in order this week. I'm seeing stuff in the chat, so I'm thinking that problem was just a quirk last week. Beautiful, nice day here today. It's Indian summer. We did have some cool weather. Now it's gotten summery again.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So this is the final installment in the series on the Four Noble Truths. We've done the truth of dukkha, the origin of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the last is the path leading to the cessation of dukkha, also known as the Eightfold Noble Path. This is the practical aspect of the Four Noble Truths. The other three deal with the problem and promise there is a solution to the problem. And here is the method. It's the way of practice. The Pali for the task at hand here is patipadati, which is to practice, literally to walk in this way. So the analogy of a path is it's a way of walking. It's a marked trail that you're following to a destination, which here is the ending of dukkha. The 8 factors of the path cover the basis of sila, samadhi, and panya. That is ethical behavior, mental development, and wisdom. So the enumeration of the path factors begins with right view. That's samadhi. Sama is almost always translated as right. That may be slightly off, actually. It's not meant to be right as opposed in a strictly ethical sense as right versus wrong, although that is appropriate for some of the path factors. It's also not quite right in the meaning of right versus wrong. Sama really means perfect, in a sense of holistic. This is the the perfect way of practicing this factor. So samaditi, ditti is view, and that's actually a pretty decent translation because the English word view has a double related but two different related meanings, as does the Pali ditti. We say view in a lower sense as being view as that which is seen by the eyes. Like you say, there's a good view out the window. View on a more abstract level means the way you understand things. This is your view, and it's a little deeper than opinion. It's more that which underlies our opinions. They are our basic way of holding reality. So the Pali Diti also has these two uses. It's used in a mundane sense as the object of eye consciousness, but it also has this more psychological sense of a view as a way of holding reality. And there's samaditi and there's michaditi. Michaditi is wrong view or confused view. And samaditi is view that is in accordance with the Dhamma. And the quality of samaditi is defined in different ways in different places in the canon. In the formula of the 8 path factors, the 4 noble truths, samaditi is defined as holding a view according to the 4 noble truths. So we have here a self-referential loop. The first factor of the 4th truth is the view of the truths themselves, to see reality as basically dukkha, and to see that has a cause, and which is craving, and to see the possibility of an ending, which is nibbana, and to see that there is this way of practice that will lead there. Elsewhere in the canon, right view is defined as seeing the world in terms of karma and rebirth. Elsewhere, it's defined as seeing the dependent origination as opposed to eternalism or annihilationism. Elsewhere, it's defined as seeing things according to the 3 characteristics of emptiness, impermanence, and suffering. So all these are overlapping categories. They're all related. But here in the formula of the Eightfold Path, the definition is seeing things according to the 4 noble truths. So a wrong view or a michaditi here would be someone who says, no, there's really no such thing as suffering. This is the best of all possible worlds, the Candide fallacy. Or someone says, well, craving is not a cause of suffering. Craving is a natural expression. It's healthy. These would be classed as michaditis. And right view here is put at the very head of the Eightfold Path, because everything else stems from that. If your view is crooked, then nothing else will proceed properly. Then we have the second path factor, which is sammasankappa, right thought, or sometimes translated as right intention, because it references particularly the intentions behind the thoughts. And the definition I'm reading here from the Satipatthana Sutta and the section on the Eightfold Path. What is right thought? The thought of renunciation, the thought of non-ill will, the thought of harmlessness. So the Pali here is actually all in negatives. What Maurice Walsh has translated as renunciation is aloba, and then the other two are adosa and amoha. That is non-greed, non-delusion, and non-ill will. And we often see this in the Pali, that virtuous factors are defined as negatives. The a prefix is a negative in Pali. So we could say renunciation, wisdom, and loving kindness, for example, as positive factors. They would cover this pretty much the same ground. But the Pali uses the negatives. And I think one reason for this is that the positive virtuous factors are actually more natural to the mind. That if greed, hatred, and delusion are not present, then the mind will be in a more natural state. So it's really the case that we overcome these negative emotions, and then we naturally will express from our own depths, from our own inner self, we will express the positive virtues like loving kindness, wisdom, and renunciation. And these are suppressed by giving into negativity. So the thoughts that we have that stem from the positive virtues that's right thought or right intention. There is karma associated with thought. In fact, according to Abhidhamma theory, all karma originates in the mind. Karma is a mental process, because any action we do with the body or with speech has to originate in the mind. It has to be deliberate. If we do something entirely accidentally, then it's not karmically effective. There has to be a thought of intention behind it. And here in the factor of right thought, we're training the mind to originate these wholesome intentions. Right speech, samavacca, is refraining from lying, refraining from slander, refraining from harsh speech, refraining from frivolous speech. This is called right speech. And lying or false speech, musawada, always comes first in any discussion of virtuous speech in the canon. And there are several suttas that deal with it with slight variations, but the factor of speaking truthfully is always given prime of place. It's the most important aspect of right speech, is that our speech is truthful. If you think about it, when you tell a deliberate lie, you're really doing a harmful thing to another person, because you are implanting delusion into their consciousness. It's really something a very serious injury when you're leading someone into delusion. You're hurting them on a psychic or a spiritual level. The definition of slander is telling tales here, heard there, in order to hurt someone's reputation. So it's like gossip, really. And it's a vice that's easy to fall into. It's kind of an entertainment to gossip about other people, but it's very unwholesome, and it leads to a lot of hurt and suffering. the best thing to do if you hear someone gossiping about somebody else of your acquaintance is to try and find something good to say about the person to counteract it. Harsh speech is abusive speech. When you insulting or degrading someone with your speech, and we know that that can be painful to hear. Although for someone who's awake like the Buddha, then it doesn't have any effect on him. There's one sutta where someone was abusing the Buddha verbally, and the Buddha, after the fellow had run down, the Buddha said, "Tell me, good sir, if I was to throw a dinner party and prepare all this food and invite you to come to the party, and you didn't show up, who would the food belong to?" And he said, "Well, it would still be yours, wouldn't it?" And the Buddha says, "Such is the case here. I refuse to accept your abuse, so it still belongs to you." And the last one is frivolous speech, and that's tirachanakata, which is sometimes translated animal speak. It's not, I don't think that's really the intention. The word tirachana is used to refer to the animal kingdom, but it means horizontal going, because an animal on all fours, its spine is horizontal to the ground. And so the literal meaning of this is lowly or horizontal, close to the ground. So lowly speech, worldly or frivolous speech. And this is running off at the mouth, just blathering and filling the empty air with speaking about nonsense. It's the lesser form of wrong speech, but it's still considered wrong speech. There's one sutta that I quite like dealing with speech, that talks about the kind of speech that a Tathagata, meaning a Buddha or a fully enlightened person, would utter and would not utter. And it begins, as usual in these cases about speech, it begins with the truth, that the Buddha will always speak the truth and not otherwise. And then it says that the Buddha's speech is connected with meaning and not otherwise. Meaning here being atta, which is a very important word in Sanskrit and Pali. And it means something more than meaning. It's like significance, importance. The meaning behind things is the atta. So the Buddhist speech is always meaningful and not otherwise. So here's the injunction against lowly speech, or tirachanakata, frivolous speech. The Buddha would never utter, frivolous speech. His speech is always connected with meaning. It has a meaning. And the third factor is it's always beneficial to the listener. So there's a reason to speak it. It'll do the person some good to hear it in some way. And the fourth factor is quite interesting, because it's split. It says the Buddha's speech already being true, meaningful, and beneficial is either pleasant to hear or spoken at the right time. So that you can easily think of cases where you need to tell somebody something that's true and meaningful and beneficial for them to hear, but it's not pleasant. They don't want to hear this. So in such a case, you wait and speak it at the right time when the person is ready to hear it. Then the next factor is right action, samma kamanta, and it's the root here in kamanta is the same as kama, related to the verb karoti, to do or to make, to work. So right action. And again, we have it in negatives, and corresponds to 4 of the 5 precepts. Right action is to refrain from killing, refrain from stealing, refrain from uh, sexual misconduct. So it's a three action, and then speech that makes 4. The precept against taking intoxicants is not directly covered in the Eightfold Path. So the 3 factors here covered by right action are not killing, panatipata, refraining from taking of life. And the definition of life is it really means the sentient life. The word panatipata means breathing things. So this refers to animal life. Animals and humans are covered by this precept. It's a breach of the precept to kill an insect or an animal or a human being. But there are degrees. With all of these things, there are degrees. It's a much more serious bad karma to kill a human being than it is to kill a mosquito. But there's some negative karma associated with killing a mosquito as well. The precept against stealing is adinadana veramani, which literally means taking that which is not given. So this is how stealing is defined. If you appropriate something that you have no right to, it's not been given it's not been given to you either as a trade or as a gift, then those are the righteous ways of acquiring an object. But to just appropriate it when it's not yours is wrong. The exception, of course, is ownerless objects. If you find something in the forest it's not owned by anyone, then you're entitled to take it. That's not a breach of the precept. And the third one is a sexual misconduct, michichara veramani, which is defined as having sexual relations with a partner of certain forbidden categories. Basically, it's an injunction against adultery, because the forbidden categories is someone who's already married, someone who's underage and under the protection of their parents, or someone who has taken religious vows. So it's actually a pretty liberal interpretation. What two unattached adults decide to do together is not necessarily a breach of the precept. It may be unskillful in other ways. It may be overindulgence in sensuality, but it's not an ethical breach of the precept if both persons are adult and they're not committed to each other or have not taken vows of celibacy. Right livelihood, and this is not defined precisely here in the original statement of the Eightfold Path. It just says, having given up wrong livelihood, he keeps himself by right livelihood. But elsewhere, right livelihood for a layperson is defined as refraining from the 5 forbidden trades. And the 5 forbidden trades are selling or dealing in human slaves, dealing in animals for slaughter, dealing in weapons, intoxicants, or poisons. Those are considered the forbidden trades. But more broadly speaking, right livelihood outside of those categories, any livelihood that you perform in the world, any job or career, it can become wrong livelihood if you cheat, if you are dishonest with your customers or with your employer or your employees. then it becomes a wrong livelihood. If you're doing harm in some way, but if you're straight up with everybody and do your uh, do your job properly and don't cheat anyone and either coming in or going out, then uh, any job can be right livelihood. It's a maybe a curiosity that right livelihood is even shows up in this list, because anything that you do uh, by way of livelihood would seem to be already covered under the rules about right speech and right action. But I think that the Buddha included it here because of the importance, the karmic importance, and the importance to your psyche about how you sustain your being. What you do in the world to sustain your being has um, a significant weight in determining the stream of your consciousness and the weight of your karma. Then the last three factors are are related particularly to mental development, that is to meditation broadly speaking. Those are right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. Right effort, samavayama, is defined as controlling, disciplining the mind. So it's defined precisely here as fourfold, as rousing up and developing wholesome factors, um, and nourishing and encouraging wholesome factors that have already arisen. And thirdly, um, preventing, guarding against the arising of unwholesome factors, and working to diminish and uh, overcome unwholesome factors that are already present. So all of these factors of right effort revolve around um, control and discipline of the mind, so that the mind is nourishing and developing wholesome factors and diminishing unwholesome factors. So this is the most important or central aspect of right effort, but we can also see right effort um, in the closely related factor of virya, or energy, which applies in anything we do, but particularly in meditation, that there must be an application, there must be an energetic commitment to the practice. The Buddha said uh, the the goal is to be had by the energetic, not by the slothful. And what is right mindfulness? This is sama sati, and here it's defined as in terms of the four foundations of mindfulness, the satipatthana, the four satipatthana. That is mindfulness directed towards the body, towards feelings, towards the mind, and towards mental states. This is another self-referential loop, because this list of the eightfold path factors is found in the Satipatthana Sutta, so it's again referring back to itself. Sati is translated mindfulness. It's a quality that I think is somewhat misunderstood from the original Pali sati from the and the Sanskrit smriti, particularly the Sanskrit version, smriti, is synonymous with memory. Now, sati does have an aspect, an important aspect of memory, which seems puzzling to people because we've been conditioned to think of mindfulness as being in the present moment. And that's true. Sati at the intense level in Vipassana meditation is being present with the object of consciousness at the present moment. It's not wandering off into past or future. But if you're fully mindful of an object, then according to Abhidhamma, it's registered. Then it's accessible to memory. So being mindful of the present moment strengthens the memory. And the possession of good sati is demonstrated by having a sound memory for details. In the Pali Canon, when someone is praised for being mindful, that is satimant, possessing mindfulness, the phrase is often used, he is very mindful, he is satimant. He easily recalls that which was said and done long ago. And in the case of very advanced beings like the Buddha or some of the other highly advanced beings, it's said that they're born satiman, which means they remember their past life. That's being born satimant or possessed of mindfulness. In the Zen tradition, there's a common, and I've heard some Theravada teachers use similar things. There's a way of testing the mindfulness of a student. If the student goes to see the master, and he goes into the master's quarters, the master will ask him, "Which side of the door did you leave your sandals on?" And if he can't remember, he's not sure, then he wasn't very mindful when he put them down. So right mindfulness is something we can develop all the time. Vipassana meditation is a disciplined, intensive way of developing mindfulness, but it's something we can develop and should be developing all the time through our daily activities to try and be present with what you're doing. And then this presence of mind is sati. It's being awake, it's being present, it's being clear. It's not being muddled or confused. And the eighth path factor is Stama Samadhi. It's usually translated wrong concentration, or right, I should say right concentration. But for a long time now, I've tried to get away from using the word concentration as a translation for samadhi, because I have found that it leads to a bad effect in people's meditation. When you're practicing samatha meditation, you're not concentrating. You concentrate to fill out your taxes, right? This is an entirely different kind of frame of mind. Samadhi is actually defined in the Visuddhimagga as non-wavering. So it's more, rather than concentration, think of it as stability or stillness. The mind that has very strong samadhi is still and stable on a single object, but that does not mean that the mind is narrowed down to the object. It means that the mind is open, vast, and expansive, but it doesn't waver, it doesn't flicker from this to that. It allows itself to be filled. This vast expanse of the mind with samadhi is filled with a single object like the breath. And here in this formula, the Eightfold Path, the definition of Samma Samadhi is given as the four jhanas. It goes through the description of the four jhanas. So right samadhi is jhana. Jhana is the culmination or the perfection of samadhi. The importance of jhana in the Buddhist system of mental development cannot be overstated. The most common word that we see when we see English translations of the suttas, and the Buddha or one of the other speakers is talking about meditation or meditating, the verb that's used most often is janati, which is to do jhana. So meditation is defined as doing jhana. I found a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings around jhana are floating around out there. It's one of the really difficult topics in Buddhist theory to pin down and get a good understanding of. But I think a good rule of thumb, a good way of understanding it, is that the mind is becoming, as it deepens into samadhi and into jhana, it's becoming more stable, it's becoming purified and simplified. So it's really wrong to think of jhana as something esoteric and beyond comprehension and out there. It's a natural state of mind. It's what the mind naturally goes to when the defilements are suppressed, when they're not arising, then when particularly the hindrances, the five nivarana, when they're not present, the mind will naturally settle into greater stability. So here we have the eight path factors, and they can be understood in different ways and different contexts, and they're not mutually exclusive. In some contexts, they're thought of as steps, one after the other, but more often they're thought of as being necessary altogether, like the strands of a rope, like an 8-stranded rope. And this is the way to make an end of suffering. This is the proper way to conduct oneself. One other aspect of the Eightfold Path that I'd like to cover is the difference between the mundane path and the transcendental path, the Lokiya Magga and Lokuttara Magga. Lokiya Magga, the path of the world, or the ordinary path, is what we practice most of the time, and it's what these definitions particularly refer to. But there is also another level to the path, which is the transcendental or beyond the world path, and this refers to the mind that is emerging into nibbana. And the Abhidhamma has some detailed descriptions of the process of the different mental states one goes through, and the final emergence into the unconditioned, or entrance into the unconditioned, is in two mind moments, or two pulses of consciousness, Magga and Pala. So sometimes you'll see in a more Abhidhamma oriented writing and speaking, they'll refer to enlightenment or awakening as Maggapala, or path and fruit. And these are the last two moments of the entrance into Nibbana. Magga is the Eightfold Path coming together in perfection at the transcendental level. And it's the final comically effective moment. Then Pala is the realization of the unconditioned, and it's classed as a resultant. It's a result of the karma made in the previous moment. It's an immediate effect. So what do we mean when we say the path comes together on the transcendental level? It means that all the path factors are oriented towards Nibbana. So to take what could be considered the most ordinary or worldly kind of path factor is let's say, right livelihood. Right livelihood refers to the way we provide ourselves with nutriment, how we earn a living. And in the mundane path, the ordinary or lokiya magga, the nutriment is the requisites of physical life, food, medicine, clothing, shelter, and so on. So, broadly speaking, nutriment of the body. But in the transcendental level of the path, which occurs in a single moment, it's how we feed them. It's not the body's not of concern here. It's how we feed the mind. And the mind is being fed on Nibbana, or the aspiration for Nibbana. It's oriented towards Nibbana. And the same goes for all the other path factors. The right thought is the thought of Nibbana. Right samadhi is the mind focused on Nibbana. So everything shifts and orients itself towards the unconditioned. And then this emerges in the very next moment as the fruit, as the realization of Nibbana. So this is the way it's described in Abhidhamma. The process of awakening or enlightenment is this twofold pulse, magga pala. That's the eightfold path, and then the realization of Nibbana. So fourth and third truth. So that concludes this talk on the Eightfold Path and the series on the Four Truths. So we'll see now. Now the chat is working. I'm seeing people's stuff on the chat. So go ahead if you have questions, put them in there now. Okay. Could the particle word sama also be understood as all-encompassing and miccha as partial? I think sama could be characterized that way. Miccha has, I think, more of a pejorative sense of something being not only wrong, but kind of perverted, twisted. I've heard that the fourth jhana magical powers arise. Is that true? Not necessarily. There is a. If you're interested in that topic, you can find it in the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification, section about how to develop different psychic abilities, and they all involve jhana on particular objects. For example, walking on water comes from developing the earth kasina, so that when the person walks out onto the water, they develop the perception of earth to such a degree that the water beneath their feet becomes earth for them, and they can walk on the water. And that requires this intense samadhi at the level of jhana. But the jhana by itself doesn't necessarily lead to any psychic power. How does right livelihood apply to monks? Yeah, it's different for monks because we following the Vinaya, and right livelihood for the bhikkhus is defined as living off that which is freely given. Um, we're not supposed to engage in trade. No. I visited a Christian monastery once and was given a tour, and they had some kind of little industry set up where they're making and selling cheese. And you know, the monk who was taking us around, he said that under the rule of Saint Benedict, the monks are enjoined to always be useful to the community and provide something, some kind of practical service to support themselves. I said, that's very interesting. It's exactly the opposite in our Vinaya. We're told to be completely useless. We're not supposed to sell our labor or produce goods. We're supposed to depend on the um, generosity of lay people. What arahant question? I'm not sure what you're referring to. Could, if it was earlier on, if it came up while I was speaking, then I pretty much ignore the chat while I'm speaking because it distracts me. If you rephrase the question, I'll try and answer it. Is being involved in gambling or addictive media wrong livelihood? Well, that's not very skillful, certainly. Uh, I don't think gambling as such is wrong livelihood if there's no cheating involved. But it is cautioned against in the Sagala Sutta. The Buddha criticizes the person who engages in gambling because they're wasting their substance. They're being foolish with their resources. Addictive media would be kind of would say unskillful nutriment, feeding the mind with rubbish. It would be just like if you just fed the body with potato chips and Coca-Cola. You know, everyone could see. You know, that's not a healthy way to feed the body. Feeding nonsense, trivial media into the mind all the time it'd be the same thing. Can you portray the cognition of an arahant? Um, Not really. I mean, that's beyond our understanding or description, except to say that the arahant has no defilements. His mind stream is purified. So any kind of negativity like fear or ill will or anxiety, you can be sure that doesn't arise in the stream of an arahant. What about planning, etc.? Well, the arahant would have to still like we have the life of the Buddha and the great arahants like Sariputta and so on. They
they still have to go through the ordinary functions of living. So they would have to this naturally, uh, plan ahead to, if they're going someplace, or I don't see how that's in any way contradictory. How to counteract a person who becomes abusive towards other family members? Well, the good thing to do is not to become upset or abusive or defensive, but uh, try and turn it gently, by saying something good about the person. Find something positive to say about the other person, and just kind of leave it at that. Don't make it a big argument or to do. Just make that remark and drop it. Can two mental factors work simultaneously? That would require some more definition. There are depend on what you mean exactly by a mental factor. It is a principle of Abhidhamma that the mind can only take one object at a time in a single mind moment. But in a single mind moment, there are several different factors operating. Um, there's attention and intention, um, uh, and the feeling and perception. All these things are happening simultaneously in a single mind moment, but there's only one object of consciousness. I have trouble believing in no self because I don't understand how there is no self. If I'm experiencing my life in past lives and not someone else's, what would you say to that? Well, there's yeah, it's always a big issue or problem for people to understand not self, and it's key. It's really key to everything, is understanding the emptiness and the not self. It's a process of cause and effect, so linking a chain of moment to moment cause and effect, but there's no substance that carries on from moment to moment. So we imagine that we because we see this continuum going back to at least to our childhood, and maybe some people can penetrate into past lives. So we think there's a person experiencing it because of this continuum, but it's really just a linkage of cause and effect. Like, think of a row of dominoes, and you knock one down and they all fall down. There's no substance. There's no single entity of that that moves along the row of dominoes. Could it be considered skillful to use something like music as a preparatory for the mind prior to meditation and stop the music to be informal practice? That could be. Some people can find a benefit in that. Of course, I think partly would depend on what kind of music it is, but I'm assuming it's something calming, some kind of calming instrumental music that could be useful. I I don't like the idea of meditating with a soundtrack, but if you put yourself into a calmer state of, or more spacious state of mind by listening to some music first, then that could be skillful. That could help some people. Understanding dependent origination is the key to understand no self, right? Certainly, that's definitely um, one of the two ways of approaching not self. The other is abhidhamma. With dependent origination, you are understanding how everything is dependently arisen, so you understand the relationship of factors, and you begin to understand how nothing exists from its own side. It's only a cause. It's only a condition of causes. So it only exists relationally or provisionally. So there's no self substance anywhere. The other way is abhidhamma, which basically means breaking down an entity into smaller and smaller components and seeing how it's a what we perceive at a coarse level as a substantial entity is actually a flickering array of what we could say atomic kind of processes, that there's no substance anywhere to be found. Those are considered the two directions. One, the dependent origination is like seeing everything relationally, so it's sort of taking the big picture, and Abhidhamma analysis is breaking things down to a finer and finer grain. It's like boring in on a kind of microscopic level and not finding a self anywhere. Regarding right effort, do you have any tips for practice to reduce the foulness that have already arisen? Well, there are, for depending on the specific defilement, there are specific meditations, for example, that are useful for counteracting defilements. Ill will, anger, uh, loving kindness, or compassion meditation will diminish those. Greediness in general, or um, say sexual lust in particular, but any kind of acquisitiveness is can be countered with meditation on 32 parts of the body, or on the foulness of the body, as in meditating on corpses. Um, Anxiety is overcome by mindfulness on the breath, and so on. You can really skillfully tune the mind by using different meditations at different times. How to deal with the fear of losing loved ones while staying far away because of conflicts and stress in the family. Um, well, that the suffering comes from your attachment and your desire for things to be otherwise than they are. Um, if the situation is uh, so problematic, it's so unbearable that you feel like you need to stay away, then what are you? All that you're suffering from is your attachment of wanting things to be different than they are. Okay, I think we're getting close to a full hour, and I think we're kind of running down here. So I'll take your leave, and next week we'll have to start something new. We've gone through all four truths, and hopefully by next week I'm going to have a better internet connection. We just got our Starlink package arrived today, and I haven't set it up yet, but I'll probably be doing that in the next day or two. So I give you all good wishes, and see you again next week.